hearing this?
Anybody hear that?
How can we possibly have the slightest idea what to expect?
Well, we're back.
Hold on to your butts.
Welcome to the Jurassic Park podcast. I'm your host, Brad Jost, and we're here to discuss all things Jurassic, including the movies, TV shows, music, toys, and more. In episode 412, we are back with a new edition of DINO DNA with Conor O'Keefe. And this week, Conor chats with Dr. Carrie Woodruff, paleontologist and curator at the Frost Science Museum in Miami, Florida. And Dr. Woodruff brings absolutely all the necessary knowledge to discuss the Pachycephalosaurs and Stygimoloch, two dinosaurs that are prominently featured in Jurassic films. So do you want to know, does the Stygi actually exist? And of course, what are the differences between Pachycephalosaur domes? Obviously, we're all wondering that. Find out today in DINO DNA. Of course, while you're listening to this episode, hit us up on Blue Sky to continue the conversation. And as always, please check out our live streams on YouTube discussing all the latest Jurassic news from around the world, Wednesday nights, 9 p.m. EST. Just not this week. Skip this week and go to next week. But also, please be sure to subscribe to my newsletter for all things Jurassic, movies, TV shows, my podcasts, and other thoughts and appearances. Find the link to the newsletter on JurassicParkPodcast.com/newsletter. But it is time, so let's go ahead and dive into the latest edition of DINO DNA with Conor O'Keefe and Dr. Carrie Woodruff.
Well, maybe dinosaurs have more in common with present-day birds than they do with reptiles.
You do understand these are actual animals, right?
You read about them in books, you see the bones in museums, but you don't really believe it.
You should hear a 4-year-old try to say Archaeornithomimus.
I read both of your books. You liked dinosaurs back then.
All vertebrate embryos are inherently female anyway. They just require an extra hormone given at the right developmental stage to make them male.
You know that I'm not at liberty to reveal the asset's genetic makeup. Nothing in Jurassic World is natural.
You will see a herd of the first dinosaurs on our tour, called Dilophosaurus.
How would you classify it, Billy?
Suchomimus, snout.
No, think bigger.
Baryonyx.
Spinosaurus aegypti. Actually, Charlie, those are herbivores. They really wouldn't be interested in fighting with each other. But these ones here are carnivores, and they really like fighting with each other. They use their teeth and their claws to rip each other's throats out.
He's 3.
Let's wait till he's 5.
Hello everyone and welcome back to DINO DNA, the show where we dive deep into the science and current understanding of the real-life prehistoric animals that inspired the amazing dinosaur characters and designs that we see in the Jurassic movies. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at the Pachycephalosaurs, those hard-headed herbivores from the Cretaceous. And joining me is a very special guest, Dr. Carrie Woodruff. Thank you so much for joining us, Carrie.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. So, Dr. Carrie Woodruff is the curator of vertebrate paleontology at the Philip and Patricia Frost Museum of Science in Miami, and previously the director of paleontology at the Great Plains Dinosaur Museum and Field Station in Malta, Montana. He worked with Dr. Jack Conor, who was, in case you didn't know, the inspiration for Alan Grant in the original Jurassic Park novels and also the advisor for the original Jurassic Park movies at Montana State University, and completed his PhD under Dr. David Evans at the University of Toronto. And he's published a number of scientific papers and children's books, and even described new species of dinosaurs, including a sauropod, Rugocordia. So, yeah, your reputation precedes you. Thanks so much for being on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. You know, it's Miami, so it's always hot and humid here, but
quite a bit different to here in London. We've had it's getting warmer, but you know, still very cold. So yeah, for those of you who are listening to the Jurassic Park podcast, this is your first episode of DINO DNA. In this show, we're going to talk about the real animals that inspired those in the movies. And this is very much an exploration of the current understanding of paleontology, which is an ever-changing discipline. I'm sure we're going to talk a bit about that. So this is being recorded in 2025. Things might change. And that's part of the joy of science, is that we're constantly finding out new things. And it also means that those designs that we see in the films, a lot of the time they're working on the latest knowledge then, and things have moved on. So it's always good to know that context before we dive in. But before we dive into our species, Carrie, I just wanted to ask a bit more about your work at the Philip and Patricia Frost Museum of Science in Miami. What's the kind of average day in the life for you there at such an incredible museum?
Average day maybe running around pulling out my hair. No, it's a really exciting opportunity because the museum has been around since the 50s. It was formerly known as the Miami Science Center, but it wasn't until they hired me that they even had paleontology as a subject matter at the museum. Oh, and in fact, previously, the museum's history is what we here in the U.S. would be called a science center. So you could learn about a lot of different scientific topics, but they didn't have curators doing research, collecting material on a particular subject matter. So in almost every sense of the word, paleontology is new to our museum. So now we have an amazing fossil preparator, Dan Large. So now paleo consists an N of 2. It's not just me. But it's great. A lot of the, stuff that we're doing is new. Like, it is fun getting to build a whole new program. It's equally just as daunting being able to do that. But the fact is, me coming into a curatorship role, I'm not necessarily, it would be amazing being at such a famed and, established museum such as the NHM, for example. But, I don't have decades of curatorships I'm being compared to, or a curatorial mold that I have to fit. Like, it's also great because Florida has no Mesozoic rock, so I can't collect local dinosaurs. The museum literally sends me all over the world to look for dinosaurs, which is really cool.
That's incredible, and I love that. Like, you're kind of breaking new ground in a role like that. Like, as you said, like that you're like the first one there.
Yeah, and there's no paleontology museum in South Florida, so everything. We have the wonderful Florida Museum of Natural History up in Gainesville. They have, if you want to learn about like the mammal fossils, Cenozoic fossils from that, from Florida, that's great. I don't work in the Cenozoic, so.
On that note, let's talk about what you do work on. So I know you've worked on a lot of different extinct animals. We're specifically going to be talking about Pachycephalosaurs today. So did you want to give us kind of like, as much as you can, a brief overview of like your work on this specific group of dinosaurs?
Yeah, so not to sound silly, I knew what Pachycephalosaurs were because I was a child who liked paleontology. So, Pachycephalosaurs, famed by the eponym of the clade Pachycephalosaurus, are, one of those, as Dave Evans always said, cereal box dinosaurs, right? They're always in this pantheon, like, of Tyrannosaurus rex, Triceratops, Brontosaurus. Please note I'm doing air quotes with that. And there was Pachycephalosaurus. So I knew about him, and I worked at Montana State University with Jack Horner, so of course I knew about Pachycephalosaurs, but I was working on sauropods with Jack, not Pachycephalosaurs. And then I got to work with David Evans for my PhD, and Dave and I had known each other for years. Like, when I was an undergrad, I knew PhD student Dave. We're only a few years apart in age, too, so, like, I'd always known Dave. And Dave asked me to come do a PhD with him. He's like, basically, look, you work on sauropods. I vaguely understand the concept of a sauropod, but we both study ontogeny, we both study histology, we both study diversity. I have a lot of Pachycephalosaurs at the ROM, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. How about we basically take a skill set that you're really familiar with and apply those to a group that I'm really familiar with as well? Because, students as a PhD are supposed to learn from your advisor, right? So we did that. So I was kind of like, oh crap, first getting into Pachycephalosaurs, because it's funny too, right? Going from sauropods to Pachycephalosaurs, I basically go from a clade that is known from everything but skulls to a clade that's essentially only known from skulls, right? So there was some learning curves, but again, I had Dave as a wonderful teacher, and of course, like, you have more fingers on one hand than Pachycephalosaur experts. So basically, my other unofficial committee members were Jack Horner, who was my previous advisor, and Mark Goodwin, who's basically one of the other living Pachycephalosaur legends. So between the three of them, I was, in a pretty good household.
Good company.
Yeah.
That's so cool. That what a swing going from like these massive animals there. We find so much of their like legs and all the other parts of their bodies, but then the heads are rare, to these ones where so many are just kind of known from their skulls. There's two different depictions of Pachycephalosaurs in the Jurassic movies. Have you seen both of these Jurassic movies? They're The Lost World from 1997 and Fallen Kingdom from 2018.
I do live under a rock, but it's fortunately not that big. So yes, I have seen those. And what was cool is like, I was of course in the cohort of Jack Horner students during Jurassic World. So like, we all as his students got to have input as well
cool.
in Jurassic Park. So that's for another time why it's a Patasaurus and not Brontosaurus.
That's great. Awesome. So just an overview for listeners. I'm sure you're very aware of these two animals. So Pachycephalosaurus, first in 1997's The Lost World, Jurassic Park, but was actually first featured in the franchise as a toy for the original movie with a head-ramming action, which we're going to talk a lot about, I think. And it was also featured in the Lost World novel in 1995. And then it actually appeared in Jurassic World in 2015 in a Blink and You'll Miss It cameo. So we'll talk a bit about that. And then the other species, and this is going to be one of my first questions around whether this is a species. So Stygimoloch first appeared in the franchise in 1998 in a video game, a fighting game called Jurassic Park Warpath on the PlayStation 1, which was really, it was like Street Fighter, but like dinosaurs, so very of its time. And then 20 years later it was featured in the movie Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. So yeah, I kind of mentioned there around whether Stygimoloch is a separate species, because I'm honest, I do not know. I know there's been a lot of discussion around this. What's the current thinking?
So a lot of this is either incredibly preliminary data or a lot of the work is forthcoming. But because of things like presentations, which have published abstracts, the information is out there if you Google it, easy enough. I am of the viewpoint, and there are basically two camps with Pachycephalosaur. Let me rephrase this. Hell Creek Pachycephalosaur taxonomy.
Yeah.
That we have only two species of Pachycephalosaurus. So there's Pachycephalosaurus wyomingensis, which is the classic big bowling ball domed specimen that, that was the one that was shown in The Lost World.
Yeah.
Stygimoloch is, if we look in, that has a bowling ball dome, but it has these big spikes basically on the back.
Yeah.
These bones called the squamosals. Now, if we look at the stratigraphy, so where in the rock record these specimens are, it may just be one heck of a coincidence, but so far, our big bowling ball dome with little nubs on the back, wyomingensis, are only in the lower half of the Hell Creek.
Yeah.
And our slightly smaller domed but big spiky Stygimoloch are only in the upper half of the Hell Creek Formation. And so, though it is debated, just like the Triceratops and, in quotes, Torosaurus, right?
Yeah.
And Triceratops perorasus in the lower Hell Creek, Triceratops horridus in the upper Hell Creek, I side with the camp believing that in the Hell Creek you have the anagenesis, so that's the evolution through time. So in the earliest Hell Creek we see the bowling ball dome Pachycephalosaurus wyomingensis, and in the latest Hell Creek, right before the asteroid impact, we have one species of Pachycephalosaurus, but it's Pachycephalosaurus spinifer. So because of anagenesis, it's the evolution of species A into B. We would say that Stygimoloch isn't real, but the species is valid, but it's a species of Pachycephalosaurus. There's also the compounding issue, like you didn't say Dracorex, but I'll say Dracorex.
Yeah.
That, we have these specimens from the middle Hell Creek, or from the lower Hell Creek, the middle Hell Creek, and the upper Hell Creek, where we can see actually the development of the dome and the development of these spikes. And we also see that is variable. And even though the Hell Creek is only a million-ish, give or take years, geologically that's very short, it is a very good window where it can actually see the evolution of these different kinds of dinosaurs that were living through it. So Is Stygimoloch real? I would say no, but the species is. So that's where it gets into some of that complexity.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, that really does help because I think, you know, especially in like kind of online circles and such, you get a lot of kind of absolutism and stuff with these discussions without having like the full information available. So that's really great to hear what we kind of have in terms of those different layers, stratigraphies laid out right there. So yeah, that's great. And yeah, just so everyone's aware, all three of these species, which can I say, there's lots of contenders for great dinosaur names, but these three have some of the best in terms of what their names mean. Pachycephalosaurus, thick-headed lizard, Stygimoloch, thorny Moloch of the Styx River, and then Dracorex, Dragon King of Hogwarts. Yeah, they're they're pretty good.
Draco Rex is the classic example of why you should not do a naming contest with children.
Oh, it was a contest, was it?
It was a contest. The Children's Museum of Indianapolis.
Oh, no way.
Bragging
I
rights.
didn't know that.
I have been the only researcher, other than the original team that examined it, I'm the only researcher that has gotten to examine Draco Rex because of all this controversy. But yeah, they did a naming contest. So it's Draco Rex Hogwartsia. And they had to get permission from J.K. Rowling to have Hogwarts.
Oh, no way. I guess it makes sense. It's probably a copyrighted term, isn't it, Hogwarts? So let that be a lesson, I guess.
No one can ever, when I see all this online discord of like, oh, we shouldn't be naming dinosaurs after pop culture every time, no one once mentions Draco Rex, and I just would like to throw that out there.
That's probably
that's my rant.
The main example. Yeah, no, naming. Actually, that's an interesting part. We actually haven't really discussed that much on this show around naming dinosaurs. Because we always say what the dinosaurs' names mean, you know, in Greek or Latin. But when it comes to naming dinosaurs, obviously this was a competition. Generally speaking, is that kind of the role done by the scientist who's describing the fossils? How does it normally kind of work? Is there a normal situation or is it different every time?
I think we're in a time of more normalcy. I mean, I've named a couple dinosaurs, even 2 species of Pachycephalosaurs. So yeah, the name of, be it a genus or species, so, you know, a scientific name binomial has a genus name and a species name. So the scientific name is up to the person who is describing it. Now, there can be cases where, you know, there might be terms like, a really famous example of the 90s, Qantas Airline just, you know, funded a dig, so they named the dinosaur Qantosaurus, right? And there's certainly times where names have been, you know, given that honor a company that funded the dig, a person who funded the expedition, all those kinds of things. So, and, you know, there's also rules for listeners who don't know. There are actually rules that say you can't name a dinosaur after yourself. You can name it after someone else, but not after yourself.
Interesting.
Yeah. And, you know, on that, there's been a lot of angry rhetoric of pop cultural references for names versus like traditional anatomical descriptions. I have to admit, I don't personally mind the pop culture, and also there are a lot more scientific names for dinosaurs that are actually also incorporating indigenous languages. So in that same mentality, like, you know, yes, not that terribly long ago, people did have to take Latin and Greek, and I do understand the historical roots of that. But also, like, just like people who used to might be more versed in Latin and Greek, were also not incredibly well versed in Latin and Greek. So using indigenous words for names is great because it recognizes the peoples where these things even came from. And also, you know, cultural references are modern references. And people say, well, they're dated. But like, also in all fairness, Tyrannosaurus rex means the tyrant lizard king. So there's nothing about its anatomy in its name, but people say it's a great name, which it is. So I don't know. I just like, let's not fight about this. Let's just have cool names. Like, I'll say this. I have a Mad Max themed Pachycephalosaur coming out hopefully this year, so I know people are going to be mad about that. But,
my goodness. I cannot wait to hear what this one is when it gets published. I'm a huge fan of Mad Max. That's music to my ears.
There you go.
Okay, I'm gonna be very ready for that. Yeah, because I know there was one a few years ago. Was it an ankylosaur or nodosaur called Zool?
Yeah,
like
so
in Ghostbusters.
That was from the next town in Montana where my museum was at.
Right.
And it was purchased by the Royal Ontario Museum. So I was like always surrounded by fossils from that exact same area, whether or not I was in Canada or the United States. But yeah, I think that's a great example of a cultural reference. Now, the head did look like Zool the demon dog, so it does describe, in a way, the anatomical attributes. It's just describing them in cultural reference, not Greek or Latin roots. So there you go. Perfect of both worlds.
Perfect of both worlds. Fantastic. Thank you for clearing that up as well. Okay, let's get on to the Pachycephalosaurs themselves. So, as you mentioned earlier when we were talking about both of these animals, I'm going to hesitate to use the word species. I'm going to say animals because they're presented as different animals in the movies.
There you go.
So we've got the Pachycephalosaurus. It's got quite a higher dome on its skull with the kind of smaller spikes around the rim. And then the Stygimoloch has a lower dome and then much larger spikes around its head. And it even has in the film's design, it has a spike on the end of its nose as well. So like really, really bold looks and really distinguished. Like as you said, these, especially Pachycephalosaurus, it's like entered the pantheon of like your dinosaur archetypes. Like if you have a collection of dinosaur toys, that's going to be one of them. And I think this kind of the hard-headed skull is a huge part of that. So does this kind of like line up with what we have from the fossil record for those two species? Animals?
Yeah, I mean, Pachycephalosaurs, so Pachycephalosauria, the clade, the group, is part of Marginocephalia. So that's the head ornamented dinosaurs along with Ceratopsia, right? So they are known for their cranial accoutrements. And much like Triceratops in a way, basically their only fossil record we have is of parts of their head. And it's not even their head, it's the dome, which is the fused portions of the frontals and the parietal. So we call it the frontoparietal dome. All the other stuff ringing around it we call the peripheral elements. That might be like the squamosal, the orbit, the supraorbital, all this other stuff. And yeah, so basically, I mean, I think I was writing about it the other day, if you between your two hands, you have more fingers than postcranial representations of all of Pachycephalosauria.
Wow.
All. And so that's a crazy thing, trying to understand their evolutionary history. We're not even deriving their evolutionary history from their skulls. We're deriving their evolutionary history between two paired cranial elements that are fused together, largely. Then you add the peripheral elements, which they seem to be a lot more, we would say, phylogenetically informative. But yeah, so yeah, they're a very, Pachycephalosaurs, you see them depicted often, but like, and they sort of, Bacher even described it once as saying, I think, paraphrase this quote, it's like the body of a Pachycephalosaur is nothing special, which it's actually the opposite. But, it's a dinosaur we always see, and yet in many respects, like with it, give you an example, in the published literature, we have no hand from a Pachycephalosaur.
Wow.
So like, it's kind of funny that it's such an iconic, I'll say dinosaur, but at least group of dinosaur, and yet there are so many blank spaces on the map for even understanding its general appearance, biology, etc.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible. So, is it because that kind of fused kind of cranium is so thick why that's probably preserving more than the rest of the animal? Or is it kind of just hard to tell? Because with fossils, you're always kind of like, it's luck of the draw in terms of preservation and stuff.
So there was an old school idea that Pachycephalosaurs were maybe like mountain goats, right? Living high up in the mountains, and that the dome was the most taphonomically, so that's taphonomy, from the moment of death to the moment of discovery. Basically, a bowling ball mass of bone could survive the fossil record the best. And there is a truth to that, but also it's just like we see with Triceratops, right? You have a big old heavy head and you got a body. Well, when floods come in and, start to bury it and everything, the big heavy thing is what stays put and all the other stuff gets washed away. So I think that's primarily the reason why.
Right, got it. It's so fascinating. So I was gonna ask about the digits on their hands, because both these animals in the films, they depict them with 5 digits on their hands. Is that kind of then more of a educated kind of filling in the gaps based on like closely related species, because most species that we look at on this show that are bipedal are theropods, and they normally, when the ones we've looked at normally have 2 or 3 fingers, rather than these are obviously not theropods. These belong to a whole different group of dinosaurs.
Yeah, so there is some of that, like 5 being the basic vertebrate bowel plan condition, right? But there is also like looking at other marginocephalians. So again, if Pachycephalosauria is united in with Ceratopsia as part of Marginocephalia, then, so there is inferences, and there are some forthcoming specimens that may or may not elucidate some of the hands, but I don't know about any of that, so that's just wishful thinking.
That's wishful thinking. Great. Okay, right. So yeah, digits is a tricky one to know from the fossil record, but yeah, I think both of them, they've given them 5, so that seems to make the most sense for what we know, kind of basically now.
I think that's a very safe bet.
Yeah, yeah, I'd say so. And then I guess with the overall body as well. So there's kind of different listings for these animals' sizes in the films. Pachycephalosaurus in the Lost World is around 4 meters long. When it appears in Jurassic World, it's actually quite a lot bigger. It's on like a CCTV footage. It's like lying on the floor, so there's people around it. It's around 6.5 meters long, and then the Stygimoloch is about 3 meters long. So when kind of these size estimates are being made for the real life animals, is that kind of extrapolating based on the size of the skull, how long we'd anticipate an animal to be if we're not finding much of the rest of the body?
Yeah, so a lot of the body estimates of Pachycephalosaurs were made from, there were some beautiful Mongolian taxa like Prenocephaly, which for Pachycephalosaurus standards has a darn good complete skeleton. It's not complete by any, compared to other dinosaurs, not by any stretch, but getting an idea of like the ratio between like the head and the femur, and okay, if the chunk of tail is this big, how much do we think is missing, etc. So generally speaking, we would say most Pachycephalosaurs are, especially by like sauropod standards, right? We would call them small.
Yeah.
But it is amazing with Pachycephalosaurs. And I think personally the Pachycephalosaurus that's depicted in Jurassic World is actually the more likely to life size.
Right.
Because a lot of times, we look at a Pachycephalosaur and we're looking at the dome, but when you start adding, like Legos, all the pieces click back together, the skulls get pretty big. And the famous Pachycephalosaurus skull that's at the American Museum of Natural History from Carter County, Montana, that skull is, and it's not complete, but it's darn near complete. And it's almost 1 meter long. Like,
wow.
It's 70 some odd. I'm sure Jack Horner and Mark Goodwin will yell at me when this comes out because like you didn't know the measurement off the top of your head. But it's a big skull.
That's massive.
So, yeah, I don't think that was the average, but actually I've actually looked at the frames and the relative size. I actually think the Pachycephalosaurus that was reconstructed in the Lost World was actually more like the body size of our new Mad Max Pachycephalosaur. So,
oh, right.
So yeah, but it is neat, like even though there's, again, not the size range we see in Theropoda or Sauropodomorph, I mean, we do have quite a bit of body size range even within Pachycephalosauria.
That's incredible. I didn't know it was that large. 70 centimeters is a fair size. Yeah, that's, I mean, we'll talk about behavior in a moment in terms of what potentially that head could have been used for. But while we're talking about the skull still, so both of these reconstructions for Pachycephalosaurus and Stygimoloch in the movies are shown to have like quite a hard keratinous beak. So like the one that you might see on like a bird in modern day kind of analogies, or they show on like a Triceratops in the movies as well. And they also seem to have like an enclosed mouth with fleshy cheeks as well, which could have been useful for keeping the plant matter in their mouth. Do we know much about what their kind of mouths and dentition would have been like from the parts of their skulls we had?
Yeah, so that's actually a lot of really cool work. And for those listeners who don't know, when Pachycephalosaur was first found, it was called Pachycephalosaurus was first found. It wasn't even known from a dome. It was from teeth. and it was called Troodon wyomingensis because its teeth look basically identical to Troodon formosus. And what's really neat is if you look in a Pachycephalosaur's mouth, they obviously don't have molars like we mammals do, but in the teeth in the back of the mouth are sort of shaped like your hand, right? They have these little finger cusps, what we would think of as like classic herbivorous dinosaur teeth.
Yeah.
But the front of the mouth, the number varies. It might be 2, it might be 3, but they have a few. They're pointed, laterally compressed, and have serrations and wear facets. So, I mean, there has been a good question asked, like, were Pachycephalosaurs strictly herbivorous? Were they omnivorous with these weird teeth? Now, I mean, we can look at animals today like the water deer. I mean, they're herbivores, but they have these like saber-toothed scimitars that they use actually for combat. So we don't know, were these very... I mean, I remember Phil Curry once telling us at the ROM, he said if you handed him a Pachycephalosaur tooth, he wasn't sure, like we call them caniform, right? These pointed teeth. Just handed it to him without looking at it under the scope and everything. He wasn't certain if he could tell you that it wasn't a theropod. So, I mean, they're so, I'll say convergent, just to be safe with the word choice, but like so convergent looking to a theropod. That's a neat thing is, was this simply just for display or combat like water deer? Were they herbivorous? Were they omnivorous? Who knows? So we're actually starting to do some of that work now.
Oh, that's so fascinating. Yeah, because I know that we've spoken about species in the past where they've done those analyses on the teeth to see how they've been worn, and that can tell us what they've been feeding on. So that's kind of currently ongoing, right, for these species.
Yeah, and I mean, he's to be lauded for leading the work, but, Tom Cullen, we were PhD students together at the ROM. I mean, it was his work with another researcher that was the one that showed that Troodon was omnivorous.
Yeah. So
if Troodon has basically a, in quotes, identical looking tooth to some of the teeth in Pachycephalosaur, and Troodon is shown the geochemical evidence suggests it's an omnivore, what, if anything, may that mean for Pachycephalosaurs? Who knows? But that's a great thing, right? Like, it's all these great mysteries we get to investigate.
Yeah. Absolutely, and that's what we say in every show. It's always so exciting to know that we, all these years later, we are still finding out things about these animals that are like so cemented in the public eye, like a Pachycephalosaurus is. Like, it was first discovered like over 100 years ago. Like, it was in the late 1800s, right? And the fact that we're still kind of going through all of these things is, it's incredible.
Yeah. Well, that was, T-Rex claim to fame, Barnum Brown, right? But he found T-Rex. He didn't name it, but he was the one that grouped Pachycephalosaurus with the domes before. So he was the, him and Schleicher, 1943. So, like, even though they were found long ago, fossils found long ago, doesn't mean we are anywhere close to knowing everything about these animals.
It's one of the great joys of science is piecing together these mysteries. Yeah. Also, just for listeners, I know you've mentioned the ROM a lot. That's the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, isn't it?
Yes.
Which is, I've had the pleasure of going there. Is one of my favorite natural history museums I've ever visited. I think it's fantastic.
Yes, and once you start working in paleontology, I don't know if other disciplines are like this, but in paleontology, we always use a museum's acronyms. Right, so the ROM is Royal Ontario Museum. It's a funny kind of side, but I was at Museum of the Rockies, MOR, and then I went to the Royal Ontario Museum, the ROM. So, and that was my academic upbringing. So I tell everyone I'm a moron.
That's great. Oh, we have a lot of I wouldn't say fun learning all of the acronyms and such at the NHM Natural History Museum for all the different departments.
Yes.
But yeah, it's very much a museum thing, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So yeah, also while we're on the physical appearance of these animals, they've given this stuff is harder to tell from the fossil record, but I do know that we have quite a clear idea of what some dinosaurs' soft tissue covering is like because of what we've of skin impressions and such that we found. They've given both of these species very similar sort of soft tissue covering, so the scales are quite small, and then some larger kind of feature scales across their backs. Is there anything that we can go off with Pachycephalosaurs, or is this kind of, they're, once again, with the film designs here, they're kind of filling in the gaps and bringing this animal to life based on similar dinosaurs?
1,000,000% made up. Now,
yeah.
I'm hoping some of my paleo colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong, at least when I'm talking about specific clades, and maybe the finer resolution you go, the better and better. But to my knowledge, we have no integumentary structures, be it an actual preserved skin or a skin impression from any Pachycephalosauria.
Right.
So it's just the speculative scales. I know because of like the Psittacosaurus quills, whatever the heck those are, that people have sort of, or artists by default, because again, Marginocephalia, Ceratopsia, and Pachycephalosauria have reconstructed similar quills, fuzzy integument, whatever the heck we want to call them, on Pachycephalosauria, but it's 100% made up. Like we got nothing, and I don't know. Like maybe one day we'll find a skin impression of a Pachycephalosaur, and that will convince an editor at Nature. But like I feel like any integument trace even of a Pachycephalosaur would be like Nature or Science worthy. At least that's me and my hopeful optimism. But yeah, we got nothing. So artists, go wild.
Yeah. On that note, they did a really it's a really cool design feature with the Stygimoloch in Fallen Kingdom, and that makes it unique among any of the dinosaurs they've shown in the Jurassic films, in that it has horizontal pupils like a goat would. So I think that's kind of calling back to that original theory that you mentioned that some paleontologists had of these kind of potentially living like bighorn sheep or mountain goats and that sort of thing. And they've probably included that design there as like a little bit of a nod, and so like audiences can kind of understand, what kind of nature this creature has when it enters the movie and starts head ramming all over the place, which is what I am desperate to talk about with you. So head ramming, what's the situation with this, with our Pachycephalosaurs? What do we know? Is it a thing?
Because I know my dear friend and colleague and dinosaur behavior specialist Dave Hone he listens to everything, so he will listen to this. But we would say morphology and behavior are not undeviating, right? So that just means like the shape of the bone isn't a one-to-one to what the animal does. And a classic example I love, if you looked at a goat, there's nothing about goats that has any sort of adaptation for being arboreal, right? Living in trees. And yet one of the greatest tourist attractions in Morocco are the tree-climbing goats, right?
Yeah, I've seen them.
Now, because we're not on a couch with the opposing's viewpoint, you will only have one viewpoint here, and that is I am of the firm belief that Pachycephalosaurs, the entire clade Pachycephalosauria, did not engage in bighorn sheep style high velocity impacts.
So that's when they kind of run at each other, like this is when bighorn sheep run at each other and lock, well they don't even lock horns, they kind of bounce their horns off of each other, don't they?
Yes. And I have witnessed it very close in person. Bighorn sheep doing this, not Pachycephalosaurs, listeners. And it is insane. Like you feel the percussion in your chest.
Wow.
Yeah, it is incredible.
That does sound fantastic. I mean, so I know that you co-authored a paper called Headbutting Through Time, which was like a whole review into like dome-headed animals. And then, so with that piece that you co-authored there, and I know that was also like looking at modern day animals, were there any sort of kind of other ideas that came off the back of that, or any other theories on why they had these huge kind of fused craniums, or is that a question for another day?
That might slightly, there are elements of that might be for a slight day, but the gist of it is, like, yes, regardless of a dome head or not, like, if we're looking at an extinct animal, we should look at an extant, aka, a living animal, right? Because we see something weird in the shape of a bone in an extinct animal. If we can see a weird shape in a modern animal, that may help us understand what's going on with that feature. why it evolved, what it's using it for, and the like. And domes actually within the fossil record occur a lot, surprisingly.
Right.
They're unless you really squint and look at one slight metric, there really are no domes today. There's a domed-headed muntjac, which just has like a slightly rounded forehead. And contrary to what the literature has said that these muntjacs headbutt, the original source that everyone cites on that says that the round-headed ones don't headbutt, but their flat-headed relatives do, so maybe the round ones did too. So, haha. But you'd have to like squint and be like, wait, is that round? But yeah, there are no domes today, right? But we have a lot of other headbutting. And headbutting, one of the things that Nicole and I really liked about this paper was, Nicole works on modern headbutting and actually adaptations for headbutting in living animals. And so then me as the paleontologist looking at it in extinct animals is, we see a lot of animals that headbutt, and there's a lot of different designs in headbutting in living animals, but essentially no domes. Well, why? When a big problem of this, in the not to poo-poo or say any negative of the past paleontological literature, but headbutting wasn't defined. So of course, listeners, I ask you, if I take my head and I butt my head into your head, is that headbutting? If I take my head and I butt my head into your body, is that also headbutting?
Right.
If I do any combination of that and I'm running or walking, are either or neither of those headbutting, right? So headbutting was a term that we didn't define, or that wasn't defined within our literature. So Nicole and I basically, to boil down the paper, said like, the fact that we don't see domes in any other extant cranial combating animals, we don't think they were used, especially when we look at what we think of as the bighorn sheep type analogy. And other attributes of the Pachycephalosaurus skeleton, we don't think that they engaged in bighorn sheep headbutting. That is high speed, high velocity impacts. It's also, this is, I say it as a joke, but it's the God's honest truth. Like, if you want to see why bringing two spheres at high impact together is a bad idea, just YouTube people running into each other with exercise balls. The hours of enjoyment you will get at, because spheres deflect, right? That's the whole point of a curved surface. And actually, bighorn sheep, this was, other paleontologists had noted this. If you look at a bighorn sheep from the side view, right, the spiral horns, they're round. And you're like, oh, those are two round objects coming together. But they're not. When you look at the front, where the horns actually come into contact, they are broad and flat. So the bighorn sheep aren't really running into each other on curved structures. They're basically two brick walls hitting each other.
That's a really good point there about that flat surface and even when like you can just kind of do it with your fist, like when you make a fist, it's flat on the top.
Yeah.
But then if your knuckles go against each other, they're just going to slide off of each other.
Exactly.
So that's a thing that you can do while you're listening along. Hopefully not in the street though, because people think you might be threatening them.
That's very true. Now, there was another paper, Joe Peterson led it, where he looked at a lot of the different, between like prenocephaly, a really basal, early, in quotes, early Pachycephalosaur versus like even Stygimoloch or Pachycephalosaurus. Because of the variety in the ornamentation of those peripheral elements, he suggested that there may have been, just like we see today between different kind of antelopes with different horns and different fighting styles, he suggested that there may have been various fighting styles. And I think that idea has a lot of ground. But the historical perception of bighorn sheep is dead wrong. There's also the things like all animals that engage in any form of cranial combat today have basically shock absorbers for the brain, right? They have these big sinuses above basically between the headgear and the brain, right? Because it's not a great idea to smash your brain into a wall, especially repeatedly. That doesn't mean Nicole's
professional
work,
advice.
Yes, exactly. Like now, Nicole's work, so my co-author showed that actually animals that engage in cranial combat aren't immune to head trauma, right? Like muskox can get the equivalent of like CTE, but they have more bioengineering, if you will, to help. And yet we don't see that in any Pachycephalosaur. I mean, in a Pachycephalosaurus, it's basically, in the really, really big specimens, right? You basically have, let's call it 20 centimeters of bone and then the brain. Nothing in between.
Right. Okay, yeah, so it's I mean, the brain's going to be hitting against the inside of that skull then, if it's...
If they were doing bighorn sheep style impact.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, that's kind of... So we don't see two individuals in the films kind of going like dueling like bighorn sheep. They do depict that in some of like the video games and such, but in the films we see the Pachycephalosaurus like crushing a metal Jeep door, and then the Stygimoloch kind of using its head to demolish a brick wall, and that kind of is the same sort of action. They're running against a really hard surface, like especially the brick wall. That's literally what you've just described. The Stygimoloch is running repeatedly into a brick wall with its head. And then I guess with the Pachycephalosaurus, it's kind of hitting like, yes, it's a metal Jeep door, but obviously not a very thick one, so it kind of bends right in. But yeah, both of those are that sort of same kind of action, which would mean that these animals in these films are probably not walking away with the best brain after these encounters, right?
Yes, and that was sort of a little Easter egg. That's why in The Lost World, Jack Horner had them do that Pachycephalosaurus is knocked out, and even the line, it's like, oh, it like ran into something and knocked itself out.
Yeah.
Like, so again, these aren't documentaries, but there are little tidbits of science hidden in some of these films. So, like that's an example. Yeah, the Pachycephalosaurus in The Lost World bashing against the Jeep door. I mean, that probably wouldn't happen. That whole like Bacher character that talks about, it's ramrod straight neck. There's this whole reason. There's a whole reason why every element of that is fundamentally wrong. Like on the structural level, the atomic structural level, how that's wrong. But I mean, also too, like I'm a horrible person. What was that great Chris Farley movie where they hit the deer and they put it in the car and then it comes to and it tears the car apart and escapes? Like, again, if you said a deer could, white-tailed deer could destroy the inside of a convertible, I'd believe you. It's not their natural habitat. So, and I've had tons of friends who have been literally stopped at an intersection and a deer has run into the side of their car and dented it. That is not natural behavior of a deer, and yet factually, a deer did dent the side of a vehicle by running into it.
Yeah, well, there you go. Like, a Pachycephalosaurus, should it have run into a door, would probably dent the door just due to it being a big animal.
Regardless.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's so interesting that you specifically call out the, you use the name Bacher, who is the real-life paleontologist that the character, who's called Burke, is based on, which is quite a fun inclusion in that film. And it's interesting because very rarely, I mean, there are paleontologist characters across these films, but that character is one of the few ones that gives like a commentary on what he's seeing right in front of him to another character, and almost everything he says is wrong, which is quite funny.
I've gotten to know Bob. Bob's a great gentleman to converse with, and that's not anything against Bob in those films. I think a lot of that too is, of course we could talk about like the psychology of this and the meaning, but I mean, for better and worse, like Jurassic Park and The Lost World, we're really in this whole paradigm shift and period of the public's understanding of dinosaurs. So having a character, be it actually based on a real paleontologist or not, who was spouting old wrong, I'm doing air quotes for all you listeners if that wasn't implied, but old wrong info, like I think that actually really helped, and maybe something the newer films should do as well. But whatever.
So I know that if there's a behind the scenes book for The Lost World, and Bob Bacher was really pleased with that character's inclusion, and I think he said something along the lines of, when his character got eaten by the T-Rex, he was like, "Look, I told you, it's a hunter, not a scavenger," which is quite funny.
Exactly.
Yeah, so one more thing. This one also might be tricky based on the limited kind of material that we have. but in the Lost World film, the Pachycephalosaurs that we see in there are kind of they're kind of grouping gregariously, like with other species on this game trail, and they're kind of coexisting with other herbivores in their habitat. And you mentioned earlier about the Hell Creek Formation, and that's where we found Pachycephalosaurus and Stygimolog and Dracorex, among many other really, really famous dinosaurs like Triceratops and Tyrannosaurus. What do we kind of know about the ecology of the habitat they lived in? And I'm sure we probably wouldn't be able to tell this. But like what sort of animal? Well, I mean, we would be able to know what other animals they would have coexisted with in the habitat, but we probably wouldn't know if they were kind of grouping up with them. But yeah, it'd be great to hear kind of what the Hell Creek landscape looked like for them.
Yeah, so we have no idea of were Pachycephalosaurs gregarious or not. I mean,
yeah,
it's a why not? Sure, artists do you.
Yeah.
At least based from the taxa, so the different genera that we have and the different environments, Pachycephalosaurs seem to be, I'll say, adaptable. So we have everything from Pachycephalosaurs in the Namek Formation of Mongolia, which not strictly dunal, right? But there were, very arid areas of it where we do get these specimens. Conversely, like the Hell Creek Formation, which is very lowland, which is basically on the edge of the Western Interior Seaway. Think of something like the Gulf Coast environment of the United States. So very warm, hot and humid, lots of vegetation. So, they, at least, that's not a, and they're only Laurasian, so we only have them in the northern continents. So yeah, they seem to at least have been rather diverse, at least. I mean, we won't find mountain dinosaurs for many burial reasons. So could there have been mountain Pachycephalosaurs? I don't know, 50-50. But at least, it didn't seem like, based on their fossils, that we only find them from a singular kind of habitat.
Right. Okay. That's really interesting. I was reading recently also that in terms of like the fossil records that there is a bias also towards like these kind of low-lying kind of coastal and like waterways as well, because of that's where fossils preserve a lot better.
Yeah. Exactly.
So could that be playing a part here as well?
Oh, I think definitely it is. I mean, you could say that with any clade of dinosaur, right? That it's just the preservational bias. Like, if you put a gun to my head, I don't know, I would bet it on my life. But I mean, in essence, anywhere in the world where you get a system where you can get deposition, a good depositional environment, you'll get fossils. I can't think off the top of my head of a Mesozoic depositional, terrestrial depositional system where you don't get dinosaurs. So yeah, places where you don't get good deposition, like tops of mountains, right? Because nothing gets buried on the top of a mountain. Everything rolls down the mountain to get buried. Or a lot of times, like even tropical rainforests have very acidic soils, which are not conducive. So yeah, there's probably countless scores of dinosaurs we'll never even know of because they never even had a chance to enter the fossil record. Just from the burial potential perspective.
It is incredible to think of that. If you were somehow able to be transported back 66 million years ago, even a paleontologist would be like, oh my god, what are these animals? Because of such a small percentage of the species that used to live are actually being discovered.
That's also the great thing I don't like, and again, this is one of those funny Jurassic Park things. Like, we look at the bones, like, I study sauropods, so, right, like, if a Diplodocus walked in front of me, I wouldn't know it was Diplodocus. I'd be like, that's probably a Diplodocus. But, like, I don't know. Now, if, like, there was a dead one and I could look at its bones, then maybe, but otherwise, it'd just be a dinosaur.
Oh yeah, that's another thing I guess with the films is that they see the dinosaur and they're like, I know exactly what species that is. Yeah. But yeah, it all makes for a great movie. And with that, we're coming towards the end of our conversation here. Is there anything else that you'd like to discuss about these animals more generally?
Yeah, so I mean, Pachycephalosaurs were what I did my dissertation on. I'm now done and back in the land of sauropods, but I am still doing a lot of this Pachycephalosaur research. there is a lot of stuff that is coming, that will be coming out, like not only new amazing specimens, but also like we finally have like reasonably complete Pachycephalosaurus skeletons, right? So filling in a lot of these missing gaps.
Incredible.
There's a lot of behavioral stuff. I mean, I will admit it's my own research, and my dissertation was published by the University of Toronto, so you can go read it free online. But like, even weirder behavioral stuff that suggests that like we should look to kangaroos, not bighorn sheep, to better understand what Pachycephalosaurs were doing. So I think, you know, as I've said in many a draft of a paper in the works, is like, you know, an already weird dinosaur clade is going to get even weirder.
I love it. That's incredible. Okay, so to round out our episode of Dino DNA, this is something we do on every episode, and it normally elicits groans from paleontologists. But in the Jurassic films, they say that they extract the DNA for these dinosaurs from the fossilized mosquitoes, and then you fill in the gaps with whatever they've got in the sock drawer, frog DNA, etc. So when we're looking at these two kind of animals, we've got Pachycephalosaurus and Stygimoloch. In terms of that DNA strand, how complete do you reckon this is out of 100% with these animal reconstructions we're seeing on the screen? I think, if I could offer some of my kind of thoughts on these over the course of our discussion, because there is a lot about these animals that are still mysteries, I imagine that, you know, the scientists have got their hands on a fair amount, but they've definitely filled in some gaps to make the rest of it work. So yeah, like to hear your take out of 100%. What do you think's complete in these genomes?
You know, a friend of mine really eloquently explained it to me years ago by understanding the statistics, but I feel like something like this, 50-50 is pretty darn good. It's either right or it's wrong. There are broad strokes, things I think we have right about Pachycephalosaurs. I mean, I will just say one thing. No one makes the tails long enough. Artists make the tails, like, make your tail, then add on another tail to that, and that's a Pachycephalosaur tail. You know, yeah, things like that. Like, Jack Horner has advocated for years that there wasn't keratin over the dome. There was actually, like, flesh, like skin and muscle and stuff over the dome, right? So, like, we don't know. We're even arguing, we being a very, very small group of paleontologists, but like how many cervicals, how many bones in the neck there were in Pachycephalosaurs.
Wow.
So I think their necks were actually really short. So like imagine, you know, you just take your movie Pachycephalosaur and just like, you know, just squishes its neck into its shoulder. Like, I think that's what they should have looked like, you know? So, I mean, if a real, you know, a living Pachycephalosaurus walked in front of a, you know, Jurassic Park fan, like I think they would be able to say like, that's a Pachycephalosaur, but I definitely do not think it would be the animal depicted in the films strolling in front of them.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect answer for that question, which is always a tricky one. So thank you so much. One thing, actually, before we kind of wrap up properly, that I forgot to mention, which was in your acknowledgements for that paper that you co-authored with Nicole Ackermans. You mentioned that you've heard about her research on another podcast called Ologies, which is a fantastic podcast. Do you want to just quickly explain that story?
Oh, yeah. So I've been an Ologies fan for years. And I was listening to it one day and, you know, heard Allie Ward's interview with Nicole. And Nicole studied headbutting in living animals. And I had it not been for Ologies, maybe I would have heard about Nicole's work in the, you know, the science communication sphere. But as soon as I heard it, I remember I was in the Salt Lake City airport and just, you know, that was when it was Twitter, messaging Nicole and was like, hey, you know, you work on headbutting in living animals. I work on headbutting in extinct animals. We should do something one day. And then Nicole was like, yeah. And I mean, that was the genesis of our paper. So, you know, without Ologies, our paper wouldn't have happened.
Incredible. And that's the power of podcasts, but also specifically Allie Ward with Ologies, which is incredible. If people are listening to this and don't listen to that, definitely listen to that. And then on that note as well, Carrie, where can people find you and your work? What are you working on? What do you want to shout out?
I am on X, formerly Twitter. I think we can still say that. And Blue Sky at and my handle is Double Beam, which that's what Diplodocus stands for. So yeah, I'm doing mostly sauropod stuff. We have new sauropods. We have cool oldest sauropods, geological occurrences coming out, all sorts of stuff. Pachycephalosaurs, we have, there's our new, I mentioned it before, we have our, Mad Max Pachycephalosaur coming. We have, of course, this skeleton to get out. We have the behavioral stuff, which, all are, in various parts of the pipe moving through. So Pachycephalosaurs will always be near and dear to me because of my PhD. Actually, my only dinosaur tattoo I have is a Pachycephalosaur.
Oh, that's awesome. It's the skull of the Pachycephalosaurus for those who are listening.
Yeah, I mean, grad school is scarring enough. You might as well physically scar yourself with the emotional scarring. I will always be interested in Pachycephalosaurs. I especially think a lot of what we'll learn about their postcrania will really be interesting because the head can only tell you so much about the animal, but really the rest of it is how you can really get a better understanding of how it interacted with its environment. So I will always, have a soft spot for Pachycephalosaurs, but I'm definitely, back in my comfort zone of sauropods.
Awesome. So yeah, definitely go follow Carey, and we'll also have the links to his social media in the show notes as well for you. As always, you can find me at Conor Ontology. I'm on Blue Sky and Instagram. But yeah, you have been listening to Dino DNA. Thanks so much for listening along. And thank you so much for dropping by, Carey. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Fantastic. We'll see you next time, folks. Goodbye.
Life will not be contained. Life breaks free, it expands to new territories, and crashes through barriers painfully, maybe even dangerously, but, well, there it is. There it is. I'm simply saying that life finds a way.
That'll do it for another episode of the Jurassic Park podcast. We appreciate each and every one of you for listening and sharing in our love of the Jurassic franchise. And of course, a huge thank you goes out to Conor for getting these incredible Dino DNA episodes set up. I love the surprise for me personally when I see in my inbox out of nowhere, because I sometimes I don't check right away, and I'm like, oh, there's a brand new episode coming for Dino DNA. I had no idea. And I love that because it gives us something, absolutely incredible that I never thought would kind of exist on this show in this capacity, something so in-depth with real paleontologists discussing the real science behind these things. As I always say in my head, I'm just like, whatever is on the screen is real to me. But I love that, for those who really want to know the differences between the real creatures and what we see in the films, you can do that here on the Jurassic Park podcast. So thank you so much to Conor for being able to do that. And of course, for Dr. Carey Woodruff for joining the show this week and being a huge part of giving us all of that information about the Pachycephalosaurus and Stygimoloch. And really, really in-depth conversation. I absolutely love it. So I hope you all did as well. So thank you to Dr. Carey Woodruff and to Conor O'Keefe. And as always, thank you to our host, Podomatic, for giving us a place to upload the podcast each and every week. Everybody out there, please know that you matter. Stay safe, be kind, fight for representation, change, and equality in the Jurassic franchise. But more importantly, outside of it, in the real world, it's especially needed these days. Let's be sure to make this world a better place. I'm going to go ahead and hand things off to myself for the outro. Take it away.
Saddle up, let's get this movable feast underway.
Continue the conversation with us on Threads and Instagram. Watch our content on TikTok and YouTube. Find us on the web at JurassicParkPodcast.com. You'll find today's episode show notes, articles, contributor bios, and so much more. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, our website, and wherever else podcasts are found. So please be sure to follow along and share with your friends, family, and fellow Jurassic fans. If you haven't already, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We will read your Apple reviews at the end of most episodes, so be sure to spare no expense. Don't miss our Wednesday night live streams, toy hunts, reviews, in-depth bonus content, gameplay, event and theme park coverage on our YouTube channel. If you want to get a hold of us or participate in the Jurassic Mailbag, you can fill out the contact form on our website or send emails and MP3s to JurassicParkPod@gmail.com. Feel free to call our voicemail line at any time to leave us a message or just to say hi. That number is 732-825-7763. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, enjoy.